Episode 74, May to June 1915. Mountains of Dead in Valleys of Myrtle, by the Hon Aubrey Herbert. Read by Robin Goldsmith. After some time in hospital on account of a serious wound incurred near Compiegne at the beginning of the war, see Locusts of Steel, the Hon Aubrey Herbert was passed fit for active service and was sent to Gallipoli, taking part in the first landing. In this episode, he describes life on the peninsula during the summer of 1915 and gives a detailed account of the armistice referred to by General Monash in episode 73. From the third week in May to the third week in June was the kernel of our time at Anzac. We had grown accustomed to think of the place as home and of the conditions of our life as natural and permanent. During this month we were not greatly troubled. The men continued to make the trenches impregnable and were contented. It was in some ways a curiously happy time. The New Zealanders and the Australians were generally clothed by the sunlight, which fitted them better than any tailor, with a red-brown skin, and only on ceremonial occasions did they wear their belts and accoutrements. Our sport was bathing, and the brotherhood of the bath was rudely democratic. There was at Anzac a singularly benevolent officer, but for all his geniality, a strong disciplinarian, devoted to military observances. He was kind to all the world, not forgetting himself, and he had developed a kindly figure. No insect could resist his contours. Fleas and bugs made passionate love to him, inlaying his white skin with a wonderful red mosaic. One day he undressed and, leaving nothing of his dignity with his uniform, he mingled superbly with the crowd of bathers. Instantly he received a hearty blow upon his tender red and white shoulder, and a cordial greeting from some Democrat of Sydney or of Wellington. "Old man, you've been amongst the biscuits." He drew himself up to rebuke this presumption, then dived for the sea, for, as he said, what's the good of telling one naked man to salute another naked man, especially when neither have got their caps? This month was marked by a feature that is rare in modern warfare. We had an armistice for the burial of the dead, which is described in the diary. On the peninsula, we were extremely anxious for an armistice for many reasons. We wished on all occasions to be able to get our wounded in after a fight, and we believed, or at least the writer was confident, that an arrangement could be come to. We were also very anxious to bury our dead. Rightly or wrongly, we thought that GHQ, living on its perfumed island, did not consider how great was the abomination of life upon the cramped and stinking battlefield that was our encampment, though this was not a charge that any man would have dreamed of bringing against Sir Ian Hamilton. Friday, May the 21st, 1915, Cabatepe. Saw Sir Ian Hamilton again this morning. The Turks are said to have put up a white flag and to have massed behind it in their trenches, intending to rush us. Left with 4 Arcadians. There was a parley yesterday while I was away. The Turks had put up some white flags, but it was not a case of bad faith, as the Arcadians believed. We are said to have shot one Red Crescent man by mistake. General Walker went out to talk to the Turks just like that. Both sides had apparently been frightened. I walked back to Reserve Gully with the General to see the new brigade. The evening sun was shining on the myrtles in all the gullies, and the new brigade was singing and whistling up and down the hills, while fires crackled everywhere. Saturday, May the 22nd, 1915, Cabatepe. S.B., a friend of the author, was sent out yesterday to talk to the Turks. But he did not take a white flag with him, and was sniped and bruised. This morning, suddenly, I was sent for. S.B. and I hurried along the beach and crossed the barbed wire entanglements. We went along by the sea through heavy showers of rain, and at last met a fierce Arab officer and a wandery-looking Turkish lieutenant. We sat and smoked in fields splendid with poppies, the sea glittering by us. Then Camel Bay arrived with S.B., while I went off as hostage. S.B. and Camel Bay, as they went, provided the Australian escort with much innocent laughter. Our barbed wire down to the sea consisted of only a few light strands, over which the Turk was helped by having his legs raised high for him. S.B., however, wished him, as he was blindfolded, to believe that this defence went on for at least 20 yards. So the Turk was made to do an enormously high goose-step over the empty air for that space, as absurd a spectacle to our men as I myself was to be later to the Turks. The Australians were almost sick from internal laughter. Diary. Camel Bay asked for a hostage, and I went out. They bandaged my eyes, and I mounted a horse and rode off with Sahib Bey. We went along by the sea for some time, for I could hear the waves. Then we went round and round, to puzzle me, I suppose, and ended up in a tent in a grove of olives, where they took the handkerchief off, and Sahib Bey said, "This is the beginning of a lifelong friendship." We had cheese and tea and coffee, Sahib Bey offering to eat first to show me that it was all right, which I said was nonsense. He said it may not be political economy, but there are some great advantages in war. It's very comfortable when there are no exports, because it means all things stay at home and are very cheap. He tried to impress me with their well-being. He said he hated all politicians and had sworn never to read the papers. The Turks had come sadly into the war against us, otherwise gladly. They wanted to regain the prestige that they'd lost in the Balkans. He said, after I had talked to him, "There are many of us who think like you, but we must obey. We know that you are just and that Muslims thrive under you, but you have made cruel mistakes by us, the taking of those 2 ships and the way in which they were taken." He asked me a few questions, which I put aside. He had had a conversation with Dash the day before when we parleyed. Dash is a most innocent creature. He had apparently told him that GHQ was an awful bore, and also the number of Turkish prisoners we'd taken. Tuesday, May the 25th, 1915, Kabatepe. We had the truce yesterday. I was afraid something might go wrong, but it all went off all right. Skene, Blamey, now Brigadier General Australian Forces, Howes, VC, now Surgeon General and Director General Medical Services of Australia, Huff and I started early. Skene offered me breakfast, but like a fool I refused. He put some creosote on my handkerchief. We were at the rendezvous on the beach at 6:30. Heavy rain soaked us to the skin. At 7:30, we met the Turks. Miralai Izzadin, a pleasant, rather sharp little man. Arif, the son of Ahmed Pasha, who gave me a card. Sculpteur et peintre, and étudiant de poésie. I saw Sahib and had a few words with him, but he did not come with us. Faridin Bey came later. We walked from the sea and passed immediately up the hill, through a field of tall corn, filled with poppies. Then another cornfield. Then the fearful smell of death began as we came upon scattered bodies. We mounted over a plateau and down through gullies filled with thyme, where there lay about 4,000 Turkish dead. It was indescribable. One was grateful for the rain and grey sky. A Turkish Red Crescent man came and gave me some antiseptic wool with some scent on it, and this they renewed frequently. There were 2 wounded crying in that multitude of silence. The Turks were distressed, and Skene strained a point to let them send water to the first wounded man, who must have been a sniper crawling home. I walked over to the second, who lay with a high circle of dead that made a mound around him, and gave him a drink from my water bottle. But Skene called me to come on, and I had to leave the bottle. Later, a Turk gave it back to me. The Turkish captain with me said, "At this spectacle, even the most gentle must feel savage, and the most savage must weep." The dead fill acres of ground, mostly killed in the one big attack, but some recently. They fill the myrtle-grown gullies. One saw the result of machine gun fire very clearly. Entire companies annihilated, not wounded, but killed, their heads doubled under them with the impetus of their rush, and both hands clasping their bayonets. It was as if God had breathed in their faces as the Assyrian came down like a wolf on the fold. The line was not easy to settle. Neither side wanted to give its position or its trenches away. At the end, Skene agreed that the Turks had been fair. We'd not been going very long when we had a message to say that the Turks were entrenching at Johnson's Jolly. Skene had, however, just been there and seen that they were doing nothing at all. He left me at Quinn's post, looking at the communication trench through which I had spoken to the Turks. Corpses and dead men blown to bits everywhere. Richards was with me part of the time, easy to get on with. Also a gentleman called indifferently by the men Mr. or Major Tibbs. A good deal of friction at first. The trenches were 10 to 15 yards apart. Each side was on the qui-vive for treachery. In one gully, the dead had got to be left unburied. It was impossible to bury them without one side seeing the position of the other. In the Turkish parapet, there were many bodies buried. Faridin told Skene he wanted to bury them, but, he said, "We cannot take them out without putting something in their place." Skene agreed, but said that this concession was not to be taken advantage of to repair the trench. This was a difficult business. When our people complained that the Turks were making loopholes, they invited me into their trench to look. Then the Turks said that we were stealing their rifles. This came from the Deadland, where we could not let them go. I went down, and when I came back, very hot, they took my word for it that we were not. There was some trouble because we were always crossing each other's lines. I talked to the Turks, one of whom pointed to the graves. "That's politics," he said. Then he pointed to the dead bodies and said, "That's diplomacy. God pity all us poor soldiers." Much of this business was ghastly to the point of nightmare. I found a hardened old Albanian Chaush and got him to do anything I wanted. Then a lot of other Albanians came up, and I said Tunya Tieta, the usual Albanian greeting. I'd met some of them in Janina. They began clapping me on the back and cheering, while half a dozen funeral services were going on all around, conducted by the chaplains. I had to stop them. I asked them if they did not want an imam for a service over their own dead. But the old Albanian pagan roared with laughter and said that their souls were all right. They could look after themselves. Not many signs of fanaticism. One huge, savage-looking Anatolian looked curses at me. Greeks came up and tried to surrender to me, but were ordered back by the Turks pretty roughly. Considering the number of their men we'd killed, they remained extraordinarily unmoved and polite. They wouldn't have if we'd been Russians. Blamey came to say that Skene had lost H and wanted me, so he, Arif, and I walked to the sea. The burying had not been well done. It was sometimes impossible to do it. As we went, we took our rifles from the Turkish side, minus their bolts, and gave the Turks their rifles in the same way. Our men gave cigarettes to the Turks, and beyond the storm centre at Quinn's Post, the feeling was all right. We sat down and sent men to look for Skene. Arif was nervous and almost rude. Then Skene came. He told me to get back as quickly as possible to Quinn's Post. As I said, I was nervous at being away, and to retire the troops at 4 and the white flag men at 4:15. I said to Arif, "Everybody's behaved very well. Now we must take care to make sure that nobody loses his head. Your men won't shoot you, and my men won't shoot me. So we must walk about. Otherwise a gun will go off and everybody will get shot." But Arif faded away. I got back as quickly as possible. Blamey went away on the left. I then found that the Turks' time was 8 minutes ahead of ours, and put on our watches. The Turks asked me to witness their taking the money from their dead, as they had no officer there. They were very worried by having no officer, and asked me if anyone were coming. I, of course, had no idea, but I told them that I would see they were all right. They were very patient. The burying was finished some time before the end. There were certain tricks on both sides. Our men and the Turks began fraternizing, exchanging badges, etc., and I had to keep them apart. At 4 o'clock, the Turks came to me for orders. I do not believe this could have happened anywhere else. I retired their troops and ours, walking along the line. At 4:07, I retired the white flag men, making them shake hands with our men. Then I came to the upper end. About a dozen Turks came out. I chaffed them and said that they would shoot me next day. They said in a horrified chorus, "God forbid!" The Albanians laughed and cheered and said, "We will never shoot you." Then the Australians began coming up and saying, "Goodbye, old chap. Good luck." And the Turks said, "Oga ola gula gula geleceksiniz, gula gula geleceksiniz. Smiling may you go, and smiling come again." Then I told them all to get into their trenches, and unthinkingly went up to the Turkish trench and got a deep salam from it. I told them that neither side would fire for 25 minutes after they got into the trenches. One Turk was seen out away on our left, but there was nothing to be done, and I think he was all right. A couple of rifles had gone off about 20 minutes before the end, but Potts and I went hurriedly to and fro, seeing it was all right. At last we dropped into our trenches, glad that the strain was over. I walked back with Temperley. I got some raw whiskey for the infection in my throat, and iodine for where the barbed wire had torn my feet. There was a hush over the peninsula.
Goodbye, goodbye, why that sweet baby tear from your eyes? old thing, chilly old chin-chin, now toodle-oo, goodbye. Brother Bert, he went away to do his bit the other day. With a smile on his lips and his lieutenant lips upon his shoulder, bright and gay. As the train moved out, he said, remember me to all the birds, though he wagged his paw and went away to war, shouting out these pathetic